Here's the first video after a summer of cogitating. I'm trying to produce these as quickly as I can. Remember, it's just me cogitating and writing. No team, I also work. But here goes. I hope you enjoy this one. Colonial or Tartarian? The official story of colonial architecture is charming in its simplicity. The colonists, we're told, arrived in foreign lands with little more than rifles, shovels, donkeys, and ideology. Yet within decades they were building soaring palaces, governors' mansions, and domed cathedrals that wouldn't look out of place in Rome, Florence, Dresden, or Toledo. Now, forgive me if this sounds uncharitable, but is it entirely plausible that men who were mostly illiterate managed to lay out entire Baroque cities with perfect symmetry? The colonial label has always been a useful story. Europe exports culture, colonies import it. But when you look at the Basilica of Bom Jesus in Goa, or the Governor's Palace in Mexico, you get the uneasy sense you're staring at something older, more rooted, and suspiciously out of step with the official timeline. The resemblance between colonial structures across continents is uncanny. Portuguese Goa, Spanish Peru, Argentina, British Calcutta, Australia all boast the same classical facades, domes and arches, as though some invisible architect was dishing out a global pattern book. The question is, was it really imported, or was it inherited? Well, the follies of the fairs. So, if the colonies were suspicious, the world fairs were downright absurd. Chicago's White City of 1893, acres of pristine marble-like buildings, complete with domes, colonnades, lagoons, electric lights, and fountains. The official line? They were all built of staff, a glorified plaster of Paris, and never meant to last. Yet photographs show monumental architecture of a permanence and scale that mocks the idea of temporariness. Why spend fortunes crafting the greatest architectural spectacle on earth, only to demolish it months later? It's as if the fairs were rehearsals for a memory wipe. Show the people what's possible, dazzle them, then burn the evidence. St. Louis, 1904, San Francisco, 1915, Paris, 1900, all the same story. Impossible grandeur followed by erasure. The pattern is too consistent to ignore, which leads to the heretical question: were these fairs truly new constructions, or the unveiling of pre-existing buildings, dressed up and then destroyed to tidy away any inconvenient evidence? When demolition wasn't neatly scheduled, history obligingly provided other means of erasure. Fires have a funny way of erupting in precisely the most ornate parts of town. The Great Fire of Toronto, 1904, Baltimore, 1904, San Francisco suspiciously thorough blaze after the 1906 quake. Even when the structures survived, someone invariably brought the wrecking ball. Then came the wars. Dresden, Rotterdam, Coventry, names synonymous with architectural slaughter. Whole medieval areas which had survived for centuries were flattened in mere days. And when the dust settled, post-war modernization made sure no inconvenient beauty slipped through the cracks. Out with ornate, in with concrete. Convenient? The railway stations of North America tell a similar tale. Vast Beaux-Arts temples of transport demolished in the 20th century as obsolete. Grand Central in New York barely escaped the wrecking crew. Penn Station wasn't so lucky. In each case, the most monumental public structures were targeted, erased, and replaced with At best, something functional, forgettable, and above all, unthreatening to the narrative. At worst, a dystopian hellhole. Enter Tartaria. On old maps, it was a vague Eurasian blob stretching from the Caspian to the Pacific, more myth than empire. But modern representations of, and reinterpretations too, really, have stripped away geography and turned Tartaria into shorthand for a lost global culture. Look at the fingerprints. Star forts with perfect geometry, giant domes, impossibly intricate facades, all cropping up in places that the history books assure us were backwaters. A star fort in Peru looks uncannily like one in Poland. A domed civic hall in San Francisco mirrors one in St. Petersburg. Coincidence? Or remnants of a shared architectural tradition? Colonial may simply be the sanitized label pasted over Tartarian remnants. Rather than admit a global culture predated the colonial empires, history insists Europeans carried architectural genius, along with absurdly talented stonemasons, in their luggage. It's a comforting story, but one that collapses the moment you compare the structures side by side. Despite the best efforts of fire, war, and the bulldozer, a few relics refuse to vanish. Old Havana still flaunts its palaces and plazas. Cusco sits on Incan foundations that Spanish masons they couldn't quite erase. Quebec's old city clings on, stubbornly European, but in the wrong hemisphere. There are countless examples of buildings scattered across the globe which seem out of place. These incongruous survivors are narrated with straight faces. Of course the colonists built this. Of course they did it in record time with limited tools and in climates they may have not have adapted to. Don't ask questions. Yet questions bubble up regardless. Why does a Jesuit mission in Paraguay look like a cousin of a Mughal palace in India? Why are star forts laid out with mathematical precision from Manila to Mexico? Why, in short, do these buildings feel less like colonial imports and more like fragments of a puzzle we've been told not to reassemble? So why the erasure? Power, pride, and narrative control. Architecture is propaganda, carved in or quarried from stone. Whoever owns the monuments owns the story of the past. And if those monuments suggest a civilization that transcended empires and geography, well, better to sweep all that away and keep the timeline tidy. The colonial label itself is an act of memory management. It folds vast and varied structures into a neat package. Europe built it all. The World Fair's demolition was the same principle, just hastened. Create spectacle, erase spectacle, control the narrative. History's become less about what was and more about what fits. Which leaves us looking at, or living in, cities deliberately scrubbed of inconvenient grandeur. A new heritage of concrete slabs and glass towers, with the odd cathedral or palace left as a museum piece, remind us of a story we're not encouraged to question. So let's get to the point. If Colonial and Tartarian are two names for the same architectural ghost, then we may not be the pioneering civilization we imagine ourselves to be. We might instead be squatters in the ruins, rebranding the works of a global culture that vanished, or was made to vanish. That thought is uncomfortable. It suggests our skyscrapers of steel and glass aren't monuments of progress, but disposable follies, destined to be the rubble of tomorrow.